Not hearing it, Allie.
You don't hear it?
Still not hearing it.
That's so weird because I shared my audio and everything.
Nope. I'll try it from my end.
That is so weird. Everything, I made sure to click everything so that it would be sharing the audio
All right.
too.
Disregard.
The death penalty is cruel, unjust, and has no place in any society. Last year, in the midst of a deadly pandemic that took countless lives, the Trump administration resumed federal executions for the first time in 17 years. What followed was an unprecedented state-sanctioned killing spree, unlike anything we'd ever seen in this country. In only 7 months, the Trump administration executed 13 people. That's more than the total number executed over the previous 6 decades. A horrible and ruthless legacy to leave. In Trump, we saw the worst example of what a change in power could bring, which is why it is essential that Congress legislate to fully end the death penalty, codify its abolishment into law, and prevent a future president from reinstating it down the line. State-sanctioned murder is not justice, and the death penalty goes against everything we claim to stand for as a nation. And at a time when more states across the country have outlawed the death penalty than ever before, more Americans oppose the death penalty, and over 70% of nations across the globe have abolished it. We must follow suit and do what's right. Death Penalty Action is calling on members of Congress to pass my Federal Death Penalty Prohibition Act of 2021 to abolish the federal and military death penalty once and for all. It's what the people want. It's what the nation needs. And it's what we must do.
And good evening, everybody. Abe Bonowitz here with Death Penalty Action, joined by Charles Keith and Ali Sullivan and Reverend Dr. Jeff Hood, and Grace Hanna is with us, and we'll see who else joins. And it is the January 2024, Happy New Year, since we got to say that, but it's 2024, and we're getting it off to a relatively slow start, especially compared to what we had last year, which is great. We had, I think, 3 executions scheduled in January last year. One was right in the first week, and this year we get to wait at least a few weeks. So we actually don't have a lot of executions scheduled in the front end of this year. Hopefully that will not change, but we're going to talk about what is coming down the road. And if you haven't seen the predictions that were made and the conversation that we had in December, we had some good conversations with folks from Oklahoma, folks from Rob Dunham from the Death Penalty Policy Project, and others. And we talked a little bit about what was happening in 2023, what we think is going to happen in 2024. And you can go back and watch the recording of that. But tonight, we really get to focus on what's going to be coming up in Alabama. And also, you may have noted we started tonight's program off with a little bit of a dated video. It's still quite relevant, I think, and especially more so now that we're approaching, really getting hot and heavy into the presidential campaign for 2024. And we'll see where it goes. But the federal death penalty is going to be a big topic of conversation a couple of times coming up in the coming months. One is we're waiting for the Attorney General to decide whether or not to seek a death penalty in the case of the man that shot up the grocery store was that in Pennsylvania or New York, Buffalo?
Buffalo.
Yeah, Buffalo. So, so that case, there's been a lot of work behind the scenes to try to convince the Attorney General not to seek a death sentence in that case, but they haven't made an announcement yet. So we're going to see, we're watching that. We're, of course, continuing to work on on just having Congress ready to pass a bill should something come forward. The president can't do anything about the federal death penalty in terms of getting rid of it without a bill to sign. So we have to pass that through Congress. We're going to be talking more about that soon. You're also going to be hearing about other things that can happen, in particular, the end of this year in December, the United Nations will again take up the question of should there be a moratorium on executions worldwide. They do that every other year, and we're going to be pushing a campaign to encourage the Biden administration to shift its vote. The United States has always voted no on the question of a moratorium on executions at the United Nations, and maybe we can get them to vote yes, or at the very least abstain, if not voting no. So we'll see where that goes. You're going to be hearing about that as well. And of course, we have to really build up our power around the president in the situation that may occur that he doesn't get reelected. Then he'll be lame duck, and that's when we could see a real opportunity for commutations of all the people on federal death row. And just to make sure we're all clear, there was a suicide now, I think, pretty well acknowledged on the federal death row December 1st. A man committed suicide and had been planning it. People knew that he was planning that, apparently, according to the conversations that he had with other prisoners who have shared that now with folks. So George Hale has an article about that, and Michael Tarm has an article about that, that we can read more about those things. But the point is that, and the suggestion is that is in part as a result of deep concern about what's going to happen in this presidential election and what happens if, somehow a Republican, possibly Donald Trump, gets elected as president. Will they resume, and how quickly will they resume federal executions and all that? So that's, coming up in 2024. We're going to be working on that stuff. But what we've got right now is the situation in Alabama. And I guess I would invite Reverend Dr. Jeff Hood to kind of set the stage for us, and we'll look at that. And I want to invite your comments and questions in the chat, and we'll try to get to that. And I don't know if Mitzi is on here. I see your comment here, Ali, but that's the other thing that could happen is we could see execution dates get set in Mississippi, where apparently they don't need more than 24 hours notice. And there's two cases where they're seeking dates. Willie Manning and another man. Let me just look at that. What's the other guy's name, Ali?
Robert Simon. I will put the petitions in the chat in just 1 second.
Sure. So we've got the those are on the unscheduled executions, but they're all on the death penalty action petition page. And of course, we're all wondering Grace, why we haven't had more dates set. We're not complaining, but we're expecting more dates to be set in Florida, possibly, or maybe the governor in Florida has decided that he doesn't need to be doing that to show how tough he is in the presidential race, because maybe he's given up on the presidential race. Who knows? Not a laughing matter, but at the same time, it's rather comical sometimes. Anyway, Jeff, you feeling better? Well, set the stage for us. What's happening? How's
Man.
Kenny doing? What do you think is going to happen in the next couple of weeks in Alabama?
Yeah, thank you, Abe. I'm one of these people that throughout the winter I'm always sick. It feels like, and of course, I would love to live somewhere much warmer. Abe makes fun of me all the time because he says that Little Rock is warm, but I think I would rather live in the Sahara Desert. With that said, I wanted to thank everybody for being here. You know, when me and Allie a number of months ago, I guess 6 months, 8 months ago, had this idea and went to Abe. I think every time we gather, it feels very centering to be here at the beginning of the month. And it feels almost like a spiritual practice. We gather, we talk, we meditate, we think about these various circumstances and situations, and we leave with a renewed purpose. With that said, I think it's important tonight as we talk about Kenny Smith and what's going on in Alabama that we certainly renew our purpose with regards to this situation. You know, it has become very clear to me, and I've said this repeatedly, that this moment in Alabama, I think, speaks to a wider moment in the country. I do believe that if nitrogen hypoxia is successful in Alabama, we are going to see nitrogen hypoxia used throughout the country. I had a conversation today with one of the federal defenders here in Little Rock, and his analysis was in Arkansas, we haven't had executions since 2017. It's obviously 2023 at this moment. Arkansas doesn't have a nitrogen hypoxia statute. There are other states, including Oklahoma and Florida, Oklahoma and Mississippi that do. But there is an understanding that a statute could come very quickly. So with that said, let me briefly explain why nitrogen hypoxia is so dangerous for our movement. I think one, we have spent years with the understanding that somehow we can fight back and we can make these drugs very hard to get. We can talk to drug manufacturers. We can push against proceeds, and we can, I guess, disrupt, if you will. Well, we have been so successful at disrupting that now we've reached a point where there's this need to innovate on behalf of the state as to what is a quicker, more expedient way to do this. Nitrogen, of course, is far easier to get than these execution drugs, lethal injection drugs that are used now. In fact, I was told, I didn't know this, but I was told upwards of 78, 80% of the air we breathe is nitrogen. I think the other thing that's important, to say, apart from the ease, is the expediency, the ease of the process or getting the drugs. I think there's also this second part in terms of the ease of actually carrying it out, the physical protocol, the physical process. All someone has to be able to do is push a button, turn a knob, those types of things in order to kill someone by nitrogen hypoxia. You don't have to train people in order to, how to find a line, how to do all of these other pieces that it takes to carry out a lethal injection. And I think that lastly, nitrogen hypoxia is they're able to describe it in a way that makes it sound like it would be the most peaceful death imaginable. I know that in Oklahoma during their conversations, they tried to link nitrogen with nitrous oxide, with the idea that it would send the person being executed into some sort of delirium before they died. That is absurd. That is not true. I think furthermore, we have been told that it's simply someone falling asleep. And, and the court hearings and in all of the various, I guess, pieces of legal material I've read throughout this process in the last couple of months, it's very clear that they don't know what's going to happen after. There's very little evidence of what happens after the nitrogen hits. Because, of course, there's not been a whole lot of people willing to be test subjects in a nitrogen experiment. So what the argument has been about, and the case that's pending in the Middle District of Alabama, what that has been about is a nitrogen execution a violation of the Eighth Amendment? Is it cruel and unusual punishment? Well, one of the arguments that's been made is if the nitrogen doesn't knock the person unconscious immediately, then it can create a nausea and a reaction from the stomach, if you will, the intestines, which oftentimes will make people throw up. Well, if that happens, somebody that is going through a nitrogen hypoxia execution is completely immobile. Their head is completely immobile. There's a 5-point mass that goes in every direction that holds the face down. So one of the things that was talked about in the last court hearing I participated in was what happens if the person is not conscious and throws up? Is there going to be anybody there to wick or use some sort of suction to get the nitrogen or the gas, the throw up out of the throat? Well, it is important for me to share with you what Commissioner Ham of the Alabama Department of Corrections said in that moment. His response was, "It is not our responsibility to make sure that someone does not choke to death. It is our responsibility to make sure that they are executed." And so you've got a situation in which, there's that answer. Then another answer that was shared was, well, if they're unconscious and they choke to death, then they wouldn't feel it, so it doesn't matter. That was another line that went into this. And I think that one more thing I wanted to say on that space is nitrogen can also cause seizures, pretty violent seizures. So I am not a medical expert, and I would never claim to be, but I can tell you that from the information that has been gathered throughout these legal proceedings, it is very clear to me that what we're going to see with nitrogen hypoxia is going to look far more violent than a lethal injection. I mean, a lethal injection, when done correctly, is, almost, I don't want to say it looks peaceful. That's not the best way of saying it, but it's not, it doesn't look, viscerally violent. This situation, there is certainly estimation that it could be very violent. I'll also say, to kind of, I'm going to step in just a second and bring it back to Kenny, but just to finish on that nitrogen road, I think that it's important to also state that this is the first time in human history where an execution threatens people that are not being executed in the room. I had a wonderful conversation yesterday with John Palumbi at the Federal Defender's Office in Montgomery, and he was just talking about how he's kind of been a sort of a historian of executions in order to kind of help him do his work presently. And he said it is absolutely the first time and unreal that this would affect everyone else. So I guess I say all of this to say that this is a very unique moment. And I think that it could have drastic consequences for a movement for the death penalty widely and nationally. And I think that we all need to be not just paying attention, but working hard to try to make sure this doesn't happen. And we are able to kind of cut this off at the pass.
Yeah, Jeff, I wanted to make sure to mention Christy Hartsheimer is with us from Nebraskans for Alternatives to the Death Penalty in the audience. And, Nebraska just last week or very recently introduced legislation to add nitrogen hypoxia, which would make it the fourth state to allow for nitrogen hypoxia as a method of execution. And I guess, they're sort of jumping the gun. Because as you say, Jeff, if this goes smoothly, if it works, that's the whole thing. And that's why all eyes are going to be on this, is because it's an experiment. Nobody's ever done this before. They don't know exactly how it's going to work. At the end of the day, if it does work, then a lot of states could go in that direction. And, but of course, for us, who death penalty action, and so many of us, it's not about how we kill our prisoners. It's that we kill them when the system is as broken as it is. Let's see. I see that Christy has raised her hand. Go ahead, Christy. Up there you are. You want to.
Do I want to what?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Can you hear me? Okay, that's okay. I'm in a space where it's probably not good. But anyway, the legislator who proposed this bill, and our legislature has only been I think this was Thursday that they presented this bill. It had 17 co-signers. We have a unicameral, so there are only 49 members of the legislature. And he said, the person who submitted the proposal said that he had been in the military, and as one of his trainings, they were in a space where there was some nitrogen being fed into the air, and that he just felt drowsy, and it was kind of a pleasant experience, and so that this would not be a problem. It would be, a good way to go. And our only other method right now is lethal injection, and we don't have the drugs for that. So that's been proposed. They haven't acted on it. It hasn't been part of the discussion yet. And I was planning to go to the Capitol tomorrow and talk to a couple of other legislators, but we're under a blizzard warning. So I just wanted to tell what one other legislator has proposed. She has proposed that all of the legislators participate in a, what do you call it when you shoot people?
Firing squad?
Firing squad. That all of the legislators be part of a firing squad so that they have to live up to their commitment to preserving the death penalty. And of course, it's tongue in cheek and it will go nowhere, but she put that as an amendment to that proposal. And I thought that was pretty ingenious.
Yeah, it's not the first time we've heard that. In fact, that's a suggestion that somebody made last week in our planning meeting with the folks in Alabama, was let's invite the governor to participate in the execution.
Yeah.
So, Christy, it's hopefully Colby Coash is still there and will be leading.
No, he is not. No, he hasn't been we have term limits because we had a very progressive legislator who was in there for a very long time and they wanted to get rid of him. So now there are term limits, and Colby has been out for quite a while now.
For those who don't know, Colby Koash is the Republican who led the campaign to pass legislation, which they did in Nebraska, to abolish the death penalty, and the governor vetoed it, and they overrode the veto. And then in 2016, they put a referendum on the ballot that reinstated the death penalty in Nebraska. So just for that background there.
And the governor was the person who he and his family funded that referendum.
Makes it hard to support the Cubs, the Chicago Cubs anymore, because the Ricketts family owns the Cubs. But yes, thank you for that, Christy. And I really appreciate you chiming in with that. And if there's anything that we all can be helpful with to you all in Nebraska, just say the word.
Well, thank you. And the reason I wanted to mention that was because of what Reverend Hood was saying about how this could become something that many other states are going to be trying to follow, Alabama and the other states who have this. And this is just an example of how, yes, it is going to start becoming a trend.
The times we're in. Well, thank you, Christy.
Yeah.
Thank you, Christy. Abe, I'm going to jump into Kenny real quick, and then
Sure, please.
Then we'll move on. So, obviously, sometimes when we talk about nitrogen hypoxia, these methods and these various trends in the death penalty, it becomes easy to talk about these things in a sort of, less than human way from time to time. And I want to remind everybody that there is a real human being named Kenny Smith, who is the object of all of these conversations. And Kenny, of course, they attempted to execute Kenny over a year ago and failed in Alabama. They were unable to run a line. And that is one of the pieces that has led to this nitrogen hypoxia moment, was that, Joe James, Alan Miller, and Kenny Smith, they failed multiple times on running these lines. So it's fascinating to also think, as a quick aside, that this moment is birthed out of failure, not success. And so, ultimately, Alabama, the Attorney General's office has said, if we had been successful in previous times, we wouldn't be moving forward with nitrogen hypoxia like we are. So again, this is a moment birthed out of failure. But with Kenny, it's important to, I said this on our organizing call not too long ago, but it's important to note that the people who tried to execute Kenny are the same people who guard him every day on death row. So he sees these people over and over again, and they're also the same people who will perform this nitrogen hypoxia execution if it happens. So to say that Kenny is regularly experiencing trauma would be an understatement. I mean, every day he's being brought back to what he endured, the hours and hours of being strapped to the gurney. And, one of the things that's been apparent with Kenny in the last couple of weeks is just an overwhelming, just stress, trauma, really unlike anything I've ever experienced or seen before. The nightmares, the difficulty, sometimes difficulty breathing. And it's, you can imagine he's already been through it before. So this is almost like it's like double. And so first and foremost, your prayers for Kenny would be very appreciated. Your good thoughts, your love. With that said, this probably within the week, we are going to get a ruling from the Middle District of Alabama about whether or not this can proceed. It is my estimation, I'm not a lawyer, not a legal scholar, but from what I experienced at the last hearing and reading the briefs and the filings, I think that we are in a place of arguing about the process as opposed to the method. which means that particular pieces of the process are being fought about, not necessarily whether a nitrogen hypoxia execution can happen or not, if that makes sense. So we are, in the coming weeks, I know we'll talk about this more on this call, but in the coming weeks, we're gearing up to do a big presence, a big moment in Montgomery on the 23rd of January, where we are coming together as a movement, demanding that Governor Ivey and the state of Alabama turn back. I believe in miracles, and so I think it's important that we work for a miracle. We put our hands and feet in the process, and so I look forward to seeing everybody in Montgomery, because this is a moment where we, as a movement, can say from all over the country, we can say we are taking this stand against nitrogen hypoxia. We are taking this stand for Kenny Smith. I think that lastly, whenever these new methods of execution come out, it is incumbent upon us for the future, for people to know that we stood there and we said no more. And I think that the health and well-being of our movement depends on us standing there in Montgomery and saying no more.
Well, thank you, Jeff. Want to note a couple things. One is, in the chat, Jack Baden Travers asked a question about, did they build a gas chamber? And I don't know if they're actually using it, but we know that they did build a facility that was supposed to be a new execution facility. It sounds like they didn't use it with the lethal injection that you attended last week, or last month. Or what was that, on the 30th, whatever day that was. But we know that they spent a bunch of money building a new facility, but it's not a gas chamber in the traditional sense of a sealed room, right? They've decided they're going to use a mask and strap that down. And of course, if you didn't get it, Jeff is Kenny Smith's spiritual advisor, and he is expecting to be in the death chamber when they kill Kenny Smith. And he actually had to sign a waiver acknowledging that should nitrogen leak from the apparatus, it could overcome Jeff, and he could suffer as a result of that, potentially even death, which is pretty crazy. And I know Jeff alluded to that. But anyway, to answer your question, Jack, what we don't know is exactly what's happened with what they did build. But I was on the phone over the last couple of years, regularly with the guy named Tom, who calls me from Alabama's death row, and he's talking about the construction that they're all having to watch happen, and something else has been delivered, and I can see it. And I mean, it's really, all this is happening in front of the people on death row. I also want to say, I just got back from a trip to Poland, where one of the things that I did was attend a Holocaust education tour, and not at all suggesting that what's happening in Alabama is Nazi driven or anything like that. But one of the things that I learned about was the testing and the experimentation that they had to do as they developed their gas chamber apparatus. And that's kind of what we're seeing here, is a testing and seeing what works. And we know that even with the electric chair, 100 and some years ago, when they were first starting to figure out using the electric chair, the first couple of electric chair executions were awful. And they're all awful, right? But they had to experiment with, how do we get this right? And the U.S. Supreme Court has ruled that pain is to be expected in the process of being executed. So it's going to be a question mark how it all works. if this works in a way that they're expecting it to. But again, death penalty action, I think most of us as abolitionists, it's not about how we kill our prisoners. The torture of the death penalty is death row, and this idea of we're going to kill you at such and such a date and time, and you have to endure the run up to that. That's the torture of the death penalty. The method and mechanism of execution is, just relatively speaking, a tiny part of it. Very important. We don't want to violate the U.S. Constitution, but at the end of the day, for us, when the system is as broken as it is, and people, like they say, Kenny Smith had a death sentence that was thrown out, and then another death sentence trial, and a judge overruled a jury, and that's illegal now. So Kenny Smith wouldn't get a death sentence if he was on trial today, and the same kind of outcome happened. All of these things are things that we have to lift up and make sure that we're shining a spotlight on it. And that's why, in addition to the petition that we have that we'll be delivering in person, as Jeff mentioned, on January 23rd, the Tuesday of that week, the execution's on Thursday at 6 p.m. Central Time. But on Tuesday, the 23rd at 11 a.m., we're going to have a bit of a rally / press conference kind of thing on the steps in front of the Alabama State Capitol, as we have done previously with all of our allies there in Alabama. And we've got 3 petitions. One is the Kenny Smith petition, and Ali has put the links to this in the chat here. And Ali, please be sure to put them on the death penalty action comments as well on that. But we have the Kenny Smith petition. We've got the no gas chamber, no nitrogen hypoxia petition, and also the pull back the curtains petition, which is a campaign that we launched after the Joe James Jr. Execution in July of 2022, when Jeff alluded to this. Joe James Jr. was on the gurney for nearly 3 hours while the media waited outside in a van for 3 hours. And we knew that Joe James Jr. had a final statement to make. And yet when the media came in and the curtains were opened, they saw that he was already unconscious. They asked him, "Do you have a statement?" And he was unresponsive, which means that they went ahead and started it, probably because they knew he would say, "They've been torturing me for the last 3 hours," as they poked him and sliced him and all of that. And at that point, we helped build a coalition in Alabama that was calling for them to pull back the curtains. In other words, the media and the public witnesses should witness the execution process from the time that the prisoner enters the death chamber and watch them do the hookup and all of that stuff. Not just the moment when they push the drugs or press the button or whatever it is, but from the moment they bring them in. And we're going to continue to champion that argument as well. And that's why we're asking for people to help. Right at the top of the front page, deathpenaltyaction.org. I'll just show you this. Here's the web page. To the front of the web page, deathpenaltyaction.org is where you can find this very easily. Just waiting for it to load here. Here we go. You got 3 petitions. If you got to do just one, do the gas chamber one or the Kenny Smith one. But we got all 3 that you could be sharing with people and encouraging people to sign these petitions. And we want to get the numbers up as much as we can, as soon as we can, as we develop our campaign over the next couple of weeks. But we've already got speakers are getting lined up. We've got the head of the state NAACP. We've got a former state governor. We've got several legislators that'll be a part of it, as well as leaders of various advocacy organizations in Alabama. So we're setting it all up and we're encouraging people to come. We already know that there's a carload, at least one carload being planned from Georgia, which is just a few hours away, but we want to invite our friends in all the surrounding states to try to put some cars together and get some people there. And we're also working really, really hard to get all the different state organizations to get people out to be there. We know it's a work day, we know it's a school day, but this is one of those moments when it's time to show up. So, are there any questions? Can you
Dave, I'll
go ahead.
just to speak to Jack's question again. I think it's important to state that if this was a chamber, I mean, obviously it would still be awful and it would still be wrong. But the problem now is it's not a chamber. I mean, which allows the nitrogen to be able to leak to the rest of the room. It's not an enclosed space around the prisoner. And so there's been a lot of suspicion that the reason that it's not a closed chamber is because it's cheaper to just build the mask. And it is more, I guess, expedient to just do the mask. And so I think that it's important to state that that if this was a chamber, it would be safer for other people who were in the room, if that makes sense. If it was some sort of enclosed thing around the prisoner, again, still be awful, but in terms of the rest of the people in the room.
Now, there was a company that was contracted to build a facility for the purpose of nitrogen hypoxia. And a campaign was instituted that actually got them to back off. One of our friends, Kevin Riggs, Reverend Kevin Riggs from in Tennessee, who lives in Franklin, Tennessee, which is just, I think, south of Nashville, was actually the person that delivered those petitions. And shortly after they delivered those petitions into the office of that corporation, those folks backed out of their contract. So that kind of work can be very effective too. But at this point, our job is to shine a spotlight on this, and that's what we're going to be doing, and that's what we invite everybody's help with. So with that, the other thing I can make sure to share is that James Ryder was supposed to have his clemency hearing on the 10th, which I think is Tuesday or Wednesday this week. And that's been put off because he got a stay as they examine his capacity, his mental health capacity. So that execution is off, which makes the next execution after this one, Ivan Cantu, who's scheduled in Texas and with a strong innocence claim. Sister Helen Prejean has come on as his spiritual advisor. We've been working, and as many of you know, we were all over the state, well, not all over, but in the Dallas area and the county that he was convicted of, which is just northeast of Dallas, last year when he was almost executed. And also we took his mother, Sylvia, to meet with legislators in the state capitol and deliver the petitions. And then, of course, he got a stay for looking for an examination. So that execution is off. We could see other executions scheduled, but really those are the next couple is Kenny Smith and then Ivan Cantu. And then after that, another one from a guy that Jeff is working with, Michael Smith in Oklahoma in April. So we'll see where things go and we'll keep you all up to date. Grace, any developments, anything you want to share about what's happening in Florida? Not to put you on the spot or anything.
Sorry, my Zoom thing wasn't popping up, so I couldn't unmute myself. I don't have a ton to share right now in Florida. There aren't currently any warrants signed. And we're just going into the new legislative session is about to begin. Last year during session, Florida became the most expansive death penalty state. Now to sentence someone to death in Florida, you only need 8 out of 12 jurors to vote for the death penalty. So in Florida, if you steal a bag of chips, you have to have 12 jurors vote to send you to prison. But if you kill someone, only 8 have to vote to execute you. They also introduced the death penalty for non-murder crimes, particularly sexual assault on a child under a certain age. And earlier this month or last month, prosecutors filed filed a case under that statute. So that's going to be making its way through the court system, and the constitutionality of that is almost certainly going to be challenged. But we'll see what the legislature does this session. I'm not sure that there's a ton of death penalty legislation anticipated, but things could change at any time. So we'll go from there.
Thank you for that. I have added a couple of links to the chat on the Zoom about Ivan Cantu, so you can check that out. And I think that's all we have for tonight. Is there any other questions, comments, updates?
I was going to add quickly that it's important to, the Ryder execution, James Ryder in Oklahoma, the fact that that's been pushed back, 120 days based on mental competency issues. It's created a moment in Oklahoma where there are factions on the the Court of Criminal Appeals who are saying, well, we want to move everybody up then. We want somebody to be able to take this spot. We don't want to waste this spot. And so I think that also kind of speaks to the cruelty of the moment in Oklahoma as well. And Michael Smith, the guy that you mentioned, one of my guys, April the 6th is his date. He's the next guy in Oklahoma. And I just think to myself, can you imagine being him and people saying, hey, let's just move everything up, and let's just take, it's just a whole nother level of cruelty.
And everybody's on edge. Reminds me during the federal execution spree, after they got past the first couple, they would add new dates, and it was always on a Friday night. They would come, tap somebody on the shoulder. Warden wants to see you. And that's the last time they saw their friends on death row. They'd go see the warden, go straight to death watch. And it was literally, there were several times. I remember when I'd get a phone call or an email on a Friday night and suddenly new dates had been set. It's terrorism, really. I want to take a moment, I put a couple links in the chat to share with you a couple of emergencies that we could use some help with. Michael Graham is a death row survivor from Louisiana. He was exonerated in 2000, and he is in a bad way. He's got something called COPD. He's lost his job because he can't breathe very well. He's waiting for disability. And don't be distracted by this number. $3,735 is money that we've raised for him, helped him raise over the last couple of years. But he's now like 3 months behind on his rent, and he just got an eviction notice if he can't come up with about $2,000 within the next month. So I'll be sharing more about this, but if you're in a position to chip in and help this guy cover his rent, we're working to see what's available from Witness to Innocence and all of that. But if you can help, the link is in the chat. Michael Graham needs your support. Also, Ahmad Issa, 22 years on death row in Ohio. He is what they call an Alford plea guy. He had to agree to plead guilty to a lesser offense in order to be released on time served. And then, of course, immediately he was then deported to Jordan, which is where he was from. Now he's being threatened by the family of his alleged victim. We know he didn't commit this crime, but the victim in this case was also Jordanian immigrant to the United States. Well, now he lives in Jordan, and so does the alleged victim's family. The person was murdered, right? But not by Ahmad. But now he's trying to get out of the country, and we're trying to raise a couple $1,000s for him in order to be able to afford a plane ticket and get resettled somewhere else. So I put that link in the chat too. There's, of course, others that can use our help. and of course, we are constantly raising funds for doing the work that the Death Penalty Action does. But and I know many of you are already terrifically generous donors. So when I say this, it's not to do anything other than let people know that there's another way to help and another need for help. And if you can help, then please do. And if you know somebody else that you would invite to help, in addition to what you're chipping in, please do that too. Because if we don't give people the opportunity to help, then we're robbing them of that opportunity. So with that, not seeing any other questions or comments, then I just want to once again remind you of some of the opportunities to make a difference. Again, sharing my screen. There, this is the Death Penalty Action webpage. This is where you can find the execution petitions. But on the front page is also just waiting for that to move. Here we go. Just down here a little bit. Here's where you can write to your members of Congress. Here's where where you can sign a petition to the president. But I wanted to share also these tools still exist for the People versus the Death Penalty Film Project. Short 5-minute vignettes from a victim family member, former warden who's executed people, a couple of former death row survivors. Well, there's still death row survivors, former people on death row, both members have witnessed to innocence. 2 brothers, Charles is with us on this call, although he stepped away, but this is a bit about the fight. We'll share that video tonight on our way out. And then here's Lisa Brown, whose son was executed, Professor Rick Halperin, a scholar on the death penalty. But on our way out tonight, I'll share this video here from Charles Keith. And thank you all again for being with us tonight. You can find this on the front page of deathpenaltyaction.org.
Well, I had a brother that was on death row back in 1994. He spent 16 years on death row. Took me a lot of time to figure out how to get him out. I learned a lot about the law. I learned a lot about the death penalty. And getting him off death row in 2010. And it also gave me the skills to come out here and help others that were on death row that needed my help.
Death penalty drove me crazy, but it's a crazy goodness because I learned so much about the law.
Governor Strickland took him off death row based on an innocent claim. They gave him life without parole, and I've been fighting life without parole for the past 12 years. Without a father, I was obligated. I mean, I got pushed into it. I never even thought about being a father figure because I was always a big brother. And now coming through something like this, I had to be more than a big brother. I had to actually go out and fight like this was my kid. And I lacked knowledge and awareness about the death penalty, so I started studying law books. I said, I got to read the same books that the lawyers are reading so I can understand the language, the lingo, what's going on, and I have to prepare myself for this long haul of fighting the death penalty. And I tell people I wasn't educated by Ohio State. I was educated by the state of Ohio. There's no rules in this game, and there's no manual that you can go how to fight the death penalty. We don't get that as laymen, so to speak. Lawyers may get it, but we don't. So we have to learn to fight in such a different way.
We're here today with our message, standing in solidarity as a people.
This is what democracy looks like!
This is about my 5th time coming down here, and each time there has been an execution. It's painful each time because you know you're taking of a life, and that person has family.
There's going to be another murder taking place, another legal lynching.
I think about the people, the workers on the other side. I mean, we over here, we're witnesses, we're abolitionists, we're against it, but those on the other side are part of it. In order to sit on a death penalty case, you have to be for the death penalty. So imagine you've got 12 people sitting there that's for the death penalty. you're most surely going to be convicted because the prosecutor is for the death penalty. So he's using you to make sure he gets a conviction. It's like you're going up against a lynch mob.
What do we want? Abolition. When do we want it? Now. What do we want? Abolition.
We must abolish the death penalty.
The racism of this nation draws a direct line from slavery to Jim Crow to mass incarceration to the death penalty. And the death penalty is, simply put, a legalized modern-day version of lynching.
And when you look at the government, see, they're killing in the name of the church. And that's why we've taken our fight to the church. That's why we've asked the pastors to come out. This is wrong. This is thou shalt not kill.
Indeed, the death penalty can only be abolished when the bloodthirsty among us, the church, lose our addiction to death and murder.
We're in a space where we have a Supreme Court that doesn't care. The rails have been greased to the death chamber, and that's what we're seeing now.
We must not allow this wicked system to shed any more blood in our names.
God gave us life. It's sacred. How can you take away anybody's life when you would not want that to happen to you also?
Fatigued by any of this?
Yes, I'm beat down. You know, I started this at the age of 34. I'm 64 now, and you know, so many things have happened, but they didn't think it was going to get this far, this deep. They don't think families, poor families such as myself, the Reeds, the Joneses, and those folks, they don't think we're going to come out and fight. How could we? How would we know how?
They all deserve life.
You're trying to save a person's life. It's a lot different than, you know, you see a person in a car or you see him drowning. You got opportunity. I told my brother I would never, you know, abandon him.